Hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss some basic definitions or basic terms that are related to the testing of hypothesis. So in the previous video relating to the hypothesis, it was about what is a hypothesis and what are some types of hypothesis such as symbol hypothesis, composite hypothesis, null hypothesis, the alternative hypothesis, etc. So now we are going to discuss about this hypothesis and some errors related to this, where it is related in such a way that if we accept H naught and there can be some error, and if we reject H naught, then also there is a possibility of error. So we are going to discuss about that. So coming to the errors in testing of hypotheses, there are two types of errors. The first one is called the type 1 error. That is, it is the error of rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. That is, when we reject a true null hypothesis, then that error is called the type 1 error. Next is the error of accepting H naught when H naught is false. That is, accepting a wrong null hypothesis. So, the error that can happen by if we accept a false null hypothesis is what is called type 2 error. So, these errors, these types of statistical errors, is given in a table where the this cross sectional table or cross table. This is H naught is actually, if it is true, and if we reject H naught, it is type 1 error. And if it is false and if we reject H naught, then that is a correct decision. And if we accept a true H naught, then that is a correct decision. And if we reject or if we accept a false hypothesis, false null hypothesis, then it is called a type 2 error. So it is just represented in a table. Now we shall go what we have discussed what are errors. That is, there are two errors, type 1 error and type 2 error. Now, depending on this type 1 error and depending on this type 2 error, we have some probabilities defined. So the first one is probability of type 1 error. What is the probability of type 1 error? So the probability of type 1 error is denoted by alpha. So we know type 1 error is rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. So alpha is equal to probability of type 1 error, which is equal to probability of reject H naught when H naught is true. So I can write it in short as probability of reject H naught given H naught. Given H naught means H naught is true is what we mean. So we have written it in short as probability of reject H naught when H naught is true. So it can be read as probability of reject H naught when H naught is true. Now is the probability of type 2 error. So we have told type 2 error means we are accepting H naught when H1 is true or accepting H naught when H naught is false. So when H naught is false, if we are accepting H naught, that probability, the probability of type 2 error is called beta or is denoted by beta, which can be written as probability of accept H naught given H1. Now we are at a point where we have to take a decision like whether to reject or accept H naught. So to take a decision, we will have a random variable or we will define a test statistics which is a random variable depending on whose values calculated from the sample that we are taking, we will determine whether to accept or reject H naught. So depending on the value, we will reject or accept H naught depending on the test statistic value. So such a random variable, such a function is called a test statistic. Next is a critical region. So this critical region concept is like we have a sample space or we have a range of variation. We have a set of values. So we are dividing those values into two. One into the acceptance region and other one into the rejection region. So if we calculate the test statistic value and that test statistic value lies in the acceptance region, then we will accept the null hypothesis. And if it is in the rejection region, that is, if it is in the rejection region, then we will reject this null hypothesis. So in the previous video, we have discussed about symbol hypothesis and all. So there was an example about the mean weight of students. The mean weight of students was like it was to be tested as mean weight of students is 50, and the decision was taken if the mean, if 10 students from a region was taken or from a college was taken, that the 10 were the sample. So those 10 students mean weights were calculated, and if the mean weight was to lie between 45 and 55, then we will accept H0. So 45, if that mean weight was between 45 and 55, we are to accept. So the acceptance region is 45 to 55. If the mean weight lies beyond this, if it is below 45 or above 55, we reject the null hypothesis. So the region of rejection is called the critical region. So if the value we determine by calculating the test statistic or from the test statistic, then if that value lies in the region of rejection, then that region is called the critical region and we will reject H0. Now, we have already discussed what is a probability of type 1 error. Probability of type 1 error can also be called as the size of the test. So, probability of type 1 error is also known as size of the test, or it is in simple terms can be even said as the significance level. Next is the power of the test. For any test, we know, like we always say, the power must be good. So the power is like the probability of rejecting H0 when H1 is true. So we are taking a correct decision, that is, we are going to reject the null hypothesis when the alternative hypothesis is true. That means in turn we are going to accept the alternative hypothesis. So such a decision, such a correct decision is called the power of the test, and power is equal to probability of reject H0 when H1 is true. So we can write it as rejection of H0 and acceptance of H0 both are like mutually exclusive events. So I can write it as probability of reject H0 when H1 is true is 1 minus probability of accept H0 when H1 is true. Similarly, we know probability of accept H0 when H1 is true is called the probability of type 2 error. So we can write it as 1 minus probability of type 2 error, and which is equal to 1 minus beta. Therefore, we can write the power of the test as 1 minus beta and the size of the test as alpha. So this was a discussion about some of the definitions or some of the terms that we come across in testing of hypothesis. I hope this video was useful. Thank you.